6 May 1985, Cologne. The country loves him. The file in my hand says he loved the uniform too. He writes it in pencil on newsroom copy paper. He does not put his name under it. He knows this line lies across 4 decades of carefully managed quiet. He is Karl M., born 1929, son of a clerk who survived the war by staying in an office until the office was rubble. He grew up in the arithmetic of ration cards, interrogation forms, and secrets. His line is a verdict. It is also a confession. 8 May 1945, Essen, American Zone. The city map is a void with street names. Whole quarters are Bombenwüste in the municipal ledger. The Allied occupation report for the Ruhr lists approximately 50% of the housing stock uninhabitable. Trains arrive, then stop. People step down into dust, and then they walk past the ruins where businesses used to be. The arithmetic of rooms begins with who has a key and who has none. Karl is 16. His mother ties a scarf around her hair and picks her way over the same stones every day. His father tries not to cough when he lifts. The women fill handcarts with broken masonry. The men, if there are men, push. The word Trümmerfrauen enters the vocabulary because mouths have to move around a shape for months and years. In one alley of Nordviertel, 10 women clear a cellar across 2 summers. The city pays them in ration supplements. The historian who compiles the Bundesarchiv, Koblenz, Essen Municipal Reconstruction, 1945 to 1948, notes, output per woman per day, 1.5 cubic meters of rubble. The mathematics of the rebuild is measured in cubic meters and calories. It is the immediate aftermath. The Allied troops enter. They drive in on roads, streamers of white flags still flutter over. The commanders print ordinances. Curfew, weapons surrender, food hoarding punishable. People read and listen. The American loudspeakers say, "You are responsible." Fear is a currency. So are cigarettes. So are cigarettes. An Allied intelligence summary from June 1945 on the Ruhr area lists mood, subdued, rumors, massive extermination, expectation, famine. The fear of retribution sits over kitchen tables like an extra guest you have to feed. Those who met the Red Army in the East have different stories. Those who give their stories to G2 or MI5 officers speak quickly and then look away. For many, the Americans and British are less frightening than the vacuum of authority. Hunger arrives as a system. The winter of 1946-47 is a ledger of loss. The weather report says average temperatures well below freezing, Rhine iced, potato harvest failed. The ration card says 1,040 calories for heavy laborers, 800 for clerks, less for children. Housewives record these numbers in notebooks under the heading, "We calculated." The mathematics of hunger is simple, ruthless, and daily. You cut bread thinner. You water the soup longer. You strip wallpaper for glue. You trade. A carton of Lucky Strikes buys boots. A pair of boots buys a sack of grain. The black market at the zoo in Berlin is famous in stories. But every town has a square where cigarettes are worth more than the currency that says Reichsmark on it. Karl watches a man make a small mountain of American cigarettes in a shop doorway. He watches the same man count them by tens, the way people count coins. He remembers that doing math felt physical. Letters from that winter read like inventory. Dortmund, 14. February 1947. Today we obtained 2 beets and a tin of lard in exchange for Papa's fountain pen. The occupation reports reflect this arithmetic without beauty. Malnutrition-related deaths increasing, tuberculosis rising, coal shortages critical. The historian's vocabulary for this is hunger winter. The oral history vocabulary is we were always cold. The mathematics of warmth is the metabolism of coal and bodies. The uniformed men in town are not German. That is new. They bring regulations, but they also bring baffled kindness and the occasional broken door. Allied patrols write attitude, cooperative, compliance, good, incidents, minor. There are exceptions. There are also long shadows that will fall later when people talk about liberation or capitulation. In 1945, for most civilians, the words are calories. Then comes a wave of paper. Denazification is a system that arrives as a questionnaire. The Fragebogen. 131 questions in the American zone, fewer in the British. Name, date of birth, party membership, organizations, SS, say, NSKK, NSFK, positions held, donations made. The Sprüchkammern are convened. Denazification tribunals whose job is to classify Germans into categories: Hauptschuldig, major offenders, Belastet offenders, Minder Belastet lesser offenders, Mitlaufer followers, Entlastet exonerated. It is a taxonomy of guilt written by committees of jurists, social workers, and administrators under military government oversight. The mathematics of guilt looks clean on a chart. In practice, it is the most complicated arithmetic in the country. Who signed what? Where someone stood in a photograph? Who the neighbors say he is? In the American zone alone, more than 3 million questionnaires are processed by 1948. The percentages tell a story that numbers often tell about systems under strain. Fewer than 1% as major offenders, a few percent as offenders, the vast majority as followers and exonerated. The mathematics of reconstruction needs bureaucrats more than it needs to settle accounts, and the ledger balances accordingly. Karl's father is a file in this system. Bundesarchiv, Sprüchkammer Essen, File 2A4735, M. Eric B. 1895, Commercial Clerk. Joined NSDAP, 1 May 1937, member of German Labour Front. Block warden tasks as required. Statements. I was required to join to keep my position. Witness statements. Positive, known as quiet man, not seen in uniform. The classification comes back. Mitläufer. The sheet is stamped in purple ink. The file's summary has 2 words, no evidence. This is how millions of lives, like bonds, are discounted to par value and put back into circulation. At the hearings, people speak in formulas. I just followed orders. I had a family. I was never political. Denazification files fill with these phrases, the way war diaries filled with weather. An occupation officer in Dusseldorf writes, investigations show that the category followers has become a social covenant. The term is now understood as an entitlement to return. The historian's term is functional reintegration. The moralist's term is something else. The people who live here call it normal. There are exceptions. There are men who go to prison. There are teachers who cannot teach. There are camp guards whose verdicts are life or no life. Their names appear in trial records, not in Karl's neighborhood. In 1947, he sees a man taken from an apartment 2 floors down. He hears later that this man had been a guard at a little-known camp near the city. No one had known, or people say no one had known. The past is already being rearranged. While these hearings and forms grind, another wave arrives. From the east, from Silesia, East Prussia, Pomerania, the Sudetenland. Expelled. A cattle car empties at the Essen station in November 1946, and the occupants have sacks and names and almost nothing else. Statistics list 12 to 14 million ethnic Germans displaced in these years. In towns already cratered, this is not an abstraction. A family of 4 from Königsberg stands in Karl's kitchen. The municipal housing office lists their case: accommodation, 2 rooms, shared with resident. Registered 9 November 1946. Occupants Mrs. M, son, daughter. Newcomers Mr. and Mrs. K, 2 children. Notes: rent to be divided. The arithmetic of rooms is brutal because it divides something that cannot be divided without bitterness. 2 families in 4 rooms are fractions that live. Gymnasiums become dormitories. Barns become addresses. Some locals use words like intruders and refugees and Schlesier as if they describe a class rather than an event. Others share soup. In oral histories recorded decades later, expellees remember the coldness of the reception more sharply than the cold of the journey. "We were tolerated," says one. "We were tolerated," says one. Some of these mouths are angry, and the anger becomes politics later under the flag of the League of Expellees. For now, it is about who gets the bed by the stove. There are other camps nearby that have nothing to do with Germans seeking rooms. Displaced persons. Survivors. Former forced labourers. They live in barracks outside town. In the British zone, Bergen-Belsen becomes a DP camp with children and weddings and hunger still. In the American zone, Landsberg has a DP population for years. Allied reports call them stateless. The German press, what there is of it in 1946, calls them DPs, because the English initials sound like relief. The people themselves call each other by names in Polish, Yiddish, Ukrainian, Lithuanian, Russian. They come to town to trade. They walk past the ruins where Germans line up with ration cards. Now the lines cross. It is in this period that German civilians realize what had been done in their name or formulate their strategies for not realizing it. The Allied screens the films. The army shows a reel in a hall, and people sit on benches. The flicker shows a bulldozer pushing corpses. The commentary is dry. The faces are not. Some people cry. Some walk out. Some walk out. Some say afterward, "It cannot be from here. They are Bolshevik tricks." Others say, "We did not know." A few say, "We should have known." The place where this happens for Karl is a school basement in July 1945, where an officer named Miller from Minnesota in a uniform that still smells like wool has set up a projector. Karl writes later in a notebook, "We sat silent. After, we went up into daylight and said nothing." Mother wiped her hands on her apron. There are also personal crossings. A Ukrainian man named Yuri, who had worked in a local factory under guard for 3 years, comes to the apartment in autumn 1945 because he has left a pair of socks behind in a drawer. He takes the socks. He says, "Goodbye." In German, he learned rivet by rivet. Then he is gone. If Karl ever sees him again, it's in the look on a face not looking back. The arithmetic of this contact is strange. 1 survivor per block, 1 story per building with no nameplates left. From 1948, reality changes with round coins. The currency reform turns stashes of Reichsmarks into paper. The new Deutsche Mark feels heavy in the hand, and it feels like a start. A British officer calls it the shot of insulin. The black market stalls vanish as if someone turned a switch. Shop windows fill. The Marshall Plan sends crates stamped with "For European Recovery." Garrioa shipments arrive before anyone can pronounce the acronym. Care packages arrive addressed to names pulled from church lists, sent by women in Ohio or Saskatchewan more often than men. This is how, in the arithmetic of calories and kindness, Germans start gaining weight again. Factories rebuild. In Wolfsburg, a factory that had made military vehicles now makes the Beetle, which is not a war machine unless joy is a kind of war. In the Ruhr, blast furnaces light again, and the British and Americans stop dismantling them. Workers' lunches get fuller. Karl becomes a clerk, then a junior accountant in an engineering firm. He learns the new democratic language, committee, co-determination, works council. The arithmetic here is wages divided by prices and rights. The basic law is promulgated in Bonn in May 1949. It is not a revolution. It is a document that makes the arithmetic of power predictable again. Denazification finishes with a whisper. Many who had been out are back in. Fewer and fewer administrators wear the badge that says removed. School books teach a passive grammar of the recent past. Phrases like, there was persecution, people were arrested, cities were bombed, are easier to print than we arrested, we bombed. Memorials go up to Germans who died in the bombings because the rubble is public and the graves are family. The expellees march under banners that say they belong again. They carry bread and salt. There is a day called Tag der Heimat, where the arithmetic of the new nation is simplified to subtraction, what was taken from us. The Cold War does its own calculation. The front line moves east to a line drawn across maps. The arithmetic of security demands expertise. This is how men with pasts become useful again. The Gehlen organization recruits, and some files stay under lock because the new state needs old knowledge. Anti-communist credentials become a form of innocence. Karl reads this in files years later and hears it in the way people talk in offices. We can trust him. He hates the East. The arithmetic of guilt bends to the mathematics of geopolitics. By the mid-1950s, the Wirtschaftswunder is a word that newspapers print with exclamation points without feeling embarrassed. Fridges arrive, motor scooters, then cars. The Wunder von Bern in 1954 gives the country a story to tell that is about 11 men and a ball, and not about 12 years. The national team lifts a cup, and the announcer Herbert Zimmermann cries, Tor! Loud enough to drown out other nouns. Karl watches in a crowded room. He believes in the game. He also knows that belief is a necessity. He folds the paper around a sausage and thinks about words he doesn't say. He notices that the beloved new TV host, a man with a broad face and a reassuring laugh, speaks to the country every Sunday as if he had always lived in Sunday. His name, then, is still unremarkable, Heinrich Falk, or if you prefer, Dieter Bergmann, or simply the host. The statistics on his show say 40% market share. His voice is a bedtime voice for a republic that wants to sleep after working hard. The archive will later assign him a signature scent aftershave and paper. For now, he is our beloved celebrity. He helps the nation learn how to speak on camera without blushing. Widows in small towns write letters that say, thank you for the music. Men at petrol stations say, he's good people. He shakes hands with factory workers for magazine covers that smell like ink and glue. This is what a new normal looks like. In the 1960s, students gather. Their mathematics is moral rather than fiscal. Frankfurt, Berlin, Cologne. There are extra police on the ring. Protest signs say, Unter den Talaren, Muff von 1000 Jahren. Under the gowns, the stale smell of 1,000 years. It is an exaggeration that knows itself. The Auschwitz trials in Frankfurt, 1963-1965, pull files out of shelves and put them in a courtroom. The testimonies die a kind of public death because they are too dense to survive newspaper columns, but the effect is cumulative like water on stone. Karl covers a hearing once as a junior reporter. He listens to a survivor read a page of names. He writes 2 paragraphs because his editor says, space. He takes the stenographer's notes home in his pocket and puts them in a drawer. The 1970s are quieter on the surface. Ostpolitik, treaties, work. The files accumulate in offices. Some are labeled wrong because that is how things happen. Others are labeled precisely because that is how systems are. Bundesarchiv shelves, Berlin Document Center. The BDC holds microfilmed Nazi Party membership cards and personnel files that ended up in American custody. Once, in 1974, Karl goes there to verify a rumor about a local official. He finds the card. He writes the story. It runs on page 6. The official resigns. The sky does not fall. He learns the rhythm of this, how the new democracy uses the old paperwork to clean itself in small circles. 1985 is a year that bleeds anniversaries. 40 years since the end of the war. Reagan and Kohl stand at Bitburg among graves that include Waffen-SS. The country argues with itself on editorial pages. Was it a mistake? Was it a misunderstanding? Memory is a theatre with more chairs than actors. In May, the staff meeting in the newsroom is about something else. But then the tip arrives. It comes in a letter without a return address, typed on a machine that leaves a distinctive A. Look at the files, it says. Look at the Berlin Document Center. Look at HFF. He loved the uniform too. It lists a possible birth name and a village near Stettin. It names a wartime paper in Königsberg. It says, start there. Karl has learned to be careful. Libel law is a kind of engineering. You cannot build on rumors. You need load-bearing documents. He makes a list. Birth certificate, war service record, denazification file, if any, party membership card, published articles. He knows names. BDC, Bundesarchiv, Landesarchiv. He knows that files live in places with fluorescent light. He knows that files live in places with Broadcasting Corporation's press office. He asks questions that produce smiles. Unthinkable, says one spokesperson. A man of integrity. He writes none of that down. He takes a train to Koblenz. In the Bundesarchiv, he requests the Personenbezogenen Unterlagen. He is told those are at the BDC. In Berlin, at the Verdischer Markt reading room, he requests a search for Volk, Heinrich Thor, or possibly Fulton, B. 1920, 1922. The clerk returns with a file. The card is under a different surname. It lists an application to join the NSDAP in 1942. The membership number has more digits than a telephone number. There is a notation, Beitritt 1943, Anwärter Sate 1939. There is also a line that mentions SA Reserve in 1934-35. He copies the card with a pencil's eye. He breathes evenly. He goes to the Bavarian State Archive for press files on wartime newspapers from East Prussia. There he finds a masthead that includes the name HF, but the first name is Hans. The last name is an alias used by contributors. He looks deeper. There is a piece in 1944 about degenerate music. It lashes a pianist by name, denounces treason through art. The style is showy and brutal. If you did not know what came next, you might even admire its rhetoric. The pianist was arrested 3 weeks later by the Gestapo, condemned for conversations and plans to flee. He was executed that autumn. Those two facts are separated by weeks and an apparatus. The mathematics of responsibility is not a straight line here. Still, there is. Karl searches the Spruchkammer files and finds a record in Lower Saxony. It lists F. Hans Heinrich, B. 1921, journalist. It adds Service, Wehrmacht Propaganda Company 1943-45. Duties, radio announcer. Witness statements are bland. The verdict is Minderbelasteter, lesser offender with a fine. He paid it and wrote film reviews by 1949. In a 1951 application to a broadcasting company, he writes, I was a follower, never active politically. The personnel file includes a glowing report from a man who had himself been a follower. The arithmetic of references is circular and stable. Karl collects all of this. He reads it at night. He looks at the pictures of the celebrity on magazine covers, smiling, benign. He hears the soft voice that reminds the country of itself. He hears the other voice in his files, the one that wrote about degenerate music, and discipline. He remembers his father's file. He thinks about categories that became passports back to normal life. He thinks about the difference between a clerk who ticked a party box to keep bread on the table and a young man who wore a uniform and performed words as weapons. He resists making the categories simple because he knows that life is not. An Allied occupation report from 1946 that he had copied years earlier keeps whispering. In public sentiment, the category Mitläufer is understood narrowly as exoneration. Over time, the term threatens to eclipse the others. He knows this line will matter in 1985. He writes his opening sentence like a sentence you could not say in 1955 or 1965 in certain rooms. The country loves him. The file in my hand says he loved the uniform too. It is both true and simplistic. The article itself takes apart the simplicity and lays the pieces down in columns. He lists dates and documents. He quotes the BDC card numbers. He quotes from the Spruchkammer file, propaganda company. He quotes from the 1944 article without adjectives. He includes a quote from an Allied intelligence summary about propagandists. Their post-war influence may be out of proportion to their wartime roles. He notes that the beloved host has spoken movingly about Germany's new democracy, about the Constitution, about his love for the audience. He notes that none of that changes the file. His editor reads it twice. The newspaper's legal counsel underlines 3 phrases in red and circles the sourcing. Make sure the BDC card is definitive. He will deny. The counsel says nothing about ethics because the mathematics of that is not in his job description. The piece runs on a Wednesday, on page 1 above the fold, next to wire photos from Bitburg. The headline is careful. Documents indicate TV. Host served in propaganda company, wrote for wartime paper. The subhead is harder. Files show party membership, past denied. The country reads. The letters begin. Shame on you, writes a woman from Siegen. He helped us through hard times. A man from Hamburg writes, at last the truth. A colleague in Munich writes a postcard, you will not be thanked for this. The Broadcasting Corporation issues a statement. The host goes on air that Sunday. He looks into the camera. He says, I was a follower. I never hurt anyone. He says, I wore a uniform like all my generation. He says, I have nothing to hide. The audience applause is heavy and dry. In the newsroom, the phones ring with arguments. Some colleagues look at Karl as if he has broken something. He has. He is not proud. He is not ashamed. He is doing arithmetic. The mathematics of guilt applied to a man with a face on billboards turns out to be harder than when applied to an anonymous clerk. The file has numbers. The person has charm. Systems are not built for charm. He sits at his desk and thinks about 1945. He thinks about the rubble women. He thinks about the hunger ledger. He thinks about the expellees in his kitchen. He thinks about the DP camp outside town and the faces of those who traded with his mother at the market with cigarettes as currency. He thinks about the grammar of school books that did not name perpetrators. He thinks about memorials that did not mention neighbors. He thinks about small bargains that made a state. He thinks about the functional reintegration. This, too, is part of democracy. He knows this. He also knows that when you build over something, the ground shifts when the weather changes. Documents become weather. The files live through decades so that memory does not have to. But sometimes memory must. He remembers his father's hearing. He remembers the purple stamp. He remembers the words, "We need him back at the office." He remembers the man taken from down the stairs. He remembers the Ukrainian who said goodbye with a pair of socks in hand. He remembers the projectionist's voice in 1945, the Allied officer saying, "You are responsible." He remembers the first Deutsche Mark coin he held. He remembers the first time he trusted a politician. He remembers liking the host's show. He remembers how good it felt. He acknowledges that. He still put the files on the page. He collects correspondence as if it were a new archive. Some letters say destroy. Some say thank you. A few enclose documents. One includes a copy of a 1950 denazification certificate for an entirely different man, as if to say, look, this is how it is. He puts them in a folder labeled 1985 Reactions. He adds a sheet to the folder with a note to himself. The mathematics of the Cold War made everything bend. The arithmetic of hunger made everything forgive. He does not show anyone this sentence. He writes it down because he must. The weeks pass. The host resigns from one show. He remains on another. The Broadcasting Corporation says the public should decide with the remote control, which is a way of outsourcing ethics to fingers. The newspaper runs follow-up pieces from historians. The word Historikerstreit appears in the culture pages later that year, when scholars argue about singularity and comparison. The fight is abstract. The letters to the editor are not. Karl goes home often during this period. His mother has been dead for years. His father died in 1972. On the top shelf of the hallway cupboard there is a box. Inside is the Spruchkammer file, his father's copy with the purple stamp. There is also a small stack of schoolbooks with maps of Europe that do not include the old East Prussia. He sees in those maps the arithmetic that shaped his generation. We subtract land, we add laws, we divide rooms, we multiply factories, we carry remainders called guilt. He thinks about the arithmetic of social memory. He writes in a notebook in the kitchen, at night when the apartment is quiet and the TV glows but is turned low. In our town, he writes, we learn to live with shortages first, bread, coal, space, then with plenty, fridges, scooters, then cars. On both sides of the curve, we learn to live with silence. It was a ration of a different kind. We were fed with half-truths because the mathematics of stability needed them. We agreed because the arithmetic of survival had trained us to agree, he writes. We were not innocent. We were not monsters. We were the people who pushed rubble and filled questionnaires and traded butter for cigarettes and listened to a kind voice on Sunday nights. He does not stop there. He turns the page and writes down the dates again. 8 May 1945, Hunger Winter, Currency Reform. 20 June 1948, Grundgesetz. 23 May 1949, Bitburg, 5 May 1985. He writes the names of the friends who left for the East when the wall went up, or who stayed. He writes the name of the Ukrainian who came back for the Sox. He writes the name of the pianist from 1944, whom he had never heard of until he saw the file. He calculates, again and again, the distance between an article in a newspaper in 1944 and a noose in a prison yard. He cannot resolve it into a neat proof. He does not believe neat proofs. He believes ledgers. He reads reports to clear his head. He reads an Allied intelligence summary from late 1945. It would be a grave mistake to assume that all who wore the uniform were equal, or that all who did not were innocent. He underlines this in blue pen. He copies it in his notebook. He writes after it. The problem is not that we did not know this. The problem is that knowing it changes little until a name appears under the sentence. A colleague asks him, a year later, whether he thinks the revelation about the beloved host made anything better. He says, the mathematics of better is not a column sum. It is a slow correction in weights. He knows that some people will always think he broke something that they needed. He does not argue with their need. He carries his own. It is late when he closes the notebook. He looks out the window at the city that had been rubble and is now a geometry of light and asphalt. He knows that the front line in his life was not a trench. It ran along the corridors of offices, where papers are stamped and files stored. It ran through kitchens where ration cards lay on the table next to bread. It ran through schools where the past was a passive voice. It ran through studios where a camera red light turned a man into a familiar friend. It ran through the reading rooms of archives where a clerk brings you a card and says nothing. It runs through his hands when he turns a page. He writes the closing line to tie it to the opening, because a narrative is a kind of bridge. He writes, 1985, newsroom. The country loves him. The file in my hand says he loved the uniform too. For me, the war after the war was learning to live where that sentence is true, painful, incomplete, and necessary, and where the front line runs not across a battlefield, but through memory and paperwork that will not stay buried.